Channel, Silent Revenge. Duration target, 28 to 32 minutes. Voice, ENGB Ryan Neural, Edge TTS, male British storyteller. POV, third-person intimate, told from a calm narrator looking at Claire. Source Rotero, Day 36, PDF chronogrammer. Recurring characters, Claire Bennett, 38, James Bennett, 41, the woman whose name is never spoken in the house. Setting, Highbury, North London, a Tuesday morning in early August 2025, chronologically the earliest entry in the archive, 3 months before EP15 Alexa, 2 months before EP14 Wi-Fi rename. Climax type, cold archival, Claire builds a photographic timeline of the wedding ring across 31 days. Tier, Cinematic V2, ~30 shots, Character Bible mandatory. Note, this is the first crack. Chronologically, this story sits before every other episode in the Bennett archive, the unobserved pencil mark on the inside of a marriage that no one had yet noticed had moved. The narrator returns to it because Claire herself, much later, identified it as the moment she stopped trusting the surface of her own life. There is a particular kind of small lie a husband tells when he stops wearing his wedding ring outside the house. He says, "The band is too tight in the heat." He says, "I cut my finger on the cellar lock, it'll only catch on the bandage." He says, "I didn't realize I'd left it on the bathroom shelf." He says, "I just hate the way it sounds against the meeting room glass." What he does not say, and what Claire Bennett began, on a Tuesday morning in early August, to suspect, was that the ring was not slipping off the way he claimed it was. That the ring was, in fact, behaving exactly as wedding rings have behaved for 2,000 years, patient, dutiful, gold, and that the small ritual by which it appeared in the cream porcelain dish in the hallway every morning before breakfast and disappeared from his finger before he stepped out into Highbury Park Road was not, as he had implied for a fortnight, the result of a husband who had grown careless about jewelry. It was the result of a husband who had grown very careful about it indeed. This is the story of the August in Highbury when the wedding ring on James Bennett's left hand, the thin gold band Claire had placed there in a small register office in Islington in the spring of 2013, began to lead two completely separate lives. One inside the house, where it was worn every evening between 6:30 and the door of the master bedroom. And one outside the house, where, for a stretch of working hours that grew, over the summer, from 12 hours a week to 26, the band sat quietly in a hidden compartment of a navy Audi A4, beside a small black velvet pouch Claire had not, until that Tuesday in August, ever seen. The ring did not know. The ring only kept its place where it was put. But Claire began, very quietly, to keep a record of where it was put. The wedding ring of James Bennett lived, when he was at home, in a small cream porcelain dish on the console table in the hallway of the house in Highbury. It was not, in the strict sense, his ring's home. He wore the ring on his left hand from approximately 7 in the morning until approximately 6:30 in the evening. The dish was where the ring went on the rare occasions when he was washing dishes by hand, kneading bread on a Sunday, or preparing for one of the long warm baths he occasionally took on a Friday evening before a particularly heavy week of court appearances. The dish had been a wedding present. It had been given to them by Claire's late aunt, in 2013, with a small handwritten card that read, "For all the small things you'll need to put down before each other." The dish lived on the console table. The console table lived in the hallway. The hallway, in August, smelled faintly of the lavender oil Claire put into the small terracotta diffuser by the door, and faintly, after 11 in the morning, of the bread the bakery on Holloway Road sent on Tuesdays. On the morning of the first Tuesday in August, Claire walked past the dish at 8:45 on her way to the kitchen. She did not, immediately, look at the dish. She had not looked at the dish, in any focused or examining way, in 12 years. What she did, on that Tuesday morning, was the small unremarkable thing she had done 1,000 times before. She walked from the foot of the stairs across the hallway towards the kitchen, and her eye passed, in the periphery, across the console table, and the cream porcelain dish, and the small bowl of pebbles she had collected in 2018 on a holiday in Pembrokeshire. The dish, on that Tuesday morning at 8:45, contained one item. It contained the thin gold wedding band of James Bennett. Claire walked into the kitchen. She filled the kettle. She set it on the gas hob. She lit the burner. She took down the navy ceramic mug she had used every morning for 9 years, and she put a teaspoon of loose Earl Grey into the small brass infuser her mother had given her, and she watched the water on the hob. It was somewhere between the third and the fourth small bubble forming on the bottom of the kettle that the unease crossed her, very faintly, like a draught from a door she had not known was open. It was a Tuesday. James had left the house at 8:20. He had not, by 9:10, when he texted her from the train, as he always did, with the small message on the 9:08, Kiss X, mentioned that he had forgotten anything. He had not come back into the hallway after putting on his coat. She would have heard him. The hallway floor in the Bennett house was original Edwardian boards, and the third board from the front door, the one near the umbrella stand, gave a small soft creak under any adult weight. James had, in 12 years, never once crossed that board without making it speak. He had crossed it only once that morning. Which meant that the ring in the cream porcelain dish had been placed there, deliberately, before he left. It had not slipped off. It had not been forgotten. It had been put down. Claire turned off the gas burner. She walked back into the hallway. She stood, for a moment, in front of the console table. She looked at the cream porcelain dish, and the thin gold band, and the small bowl of pebbles, and the lavender diffuser. She did not pick the ring up. She did not move it. What she did was take her phone out of the pocket of her cream cashmere knit, and she opened the camera app, and she took a single photograph. The photograph was framed slightly from above. The dish in the center of the frame. The ring in the center of the dish. The morning light from the small fanlight above the front door falling on it from the left. She did not, at the time, know precisely why she was taking the photograph. She told herself, in the small careful voice she used with herself in the mornings, that it was simply a beautiful image. The light. The gold. The stillness. She tagged the photograph in her phone with the word home. She did not look at it again that day. She closed the camera. She walked back into the kitchen. She made her Earl Grey. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and drafted 3 reading lists for an undergraduate lecture on Victorian library cataloguing. At 6:25 in the evening, James came home. He stood in the hallway, taking off his charcoal wool overcoat. He hung it on the third peg from the door, the way he had done for 12 years. He turned, casually, to the console table. He picked up the thin gold wedding band with 2 fingers. He slid it onto the 4th finger of his left hand. He did not, in that small action, hesitate at all. He walked into the kitchen, kissed Claire on the temple, and asked what was for supper. Claire said, "Roast chicken." She did not, that night, mention the ring. She did not mention it the next morning either, when, at 8:20, James left the house, and at 8:23, with the kettle starting to whistle behind her, she walked into the hallway and saw, again, the thin gold band lying alone in the cream porcelain dish. She took a second photograph. She tagged it home. She returned to the kitchen. By the end of the first week of August, her phone contained 9 photographs, 6 on weekday mornings, 3 on weekday evenings, each of them showing the cream porcelain dish from the same angle, at the same height, with a careful timestamp. In every photograph, the ring was either present or absent at the precise moment the camera shutter had clicked. She named the album, on the Monday of the second week, Hallway Light. It was the kind of album a woman in her late 30s, with an interest in interior design, might keep without anyone ever asking what was in it. It was also, although she did not yet know this in those terms, a folder she could quietly add things to without James noticing. It was on the second Saturday morning of August that Claire opened the glove compartment of the Navy Audi A4. She had not, in the 4 years James had owned the car, opened it more than perhaps a dozen times. It was the compartment in which he kept his road atlas, the small black torch he had bought in Halfords in 2019, a packet of mints, 2 old parking receipts from the Chambers car park in Lincoln's Inn, and the manual. He had taken the train into Chambers that morning, although it was a Saturday, a deposition, he had said, that could not wait. He had left the Audi on the driveway. He had said to Claire, "If you want to use it for the supermarket, the keys are on the hook." She had not, that morning, intended to use it for the supermarket. What she had intended to do was vacuum the boot, where the small navy carrier of recycling glass had spilled, the previous Sunday, on the way back from the bottle bank. She had let it sit too long. She had been, for the past 9 days, a woman with too many small administrative quiet things on her mind to remember to vacuum a boot. She opened the boot. She vacuumed the boot. She closed the boot. What she intended to do was sit, very briefly, in the small leather quiet of the car her husband drove every day to and from the chambers in Holborn, and to feel, for a moment, the small unremarkable thing of being inside the daily rhythm of his life. She did this for approximately 90 seconds. It was, on the 10th of those 90 seconds, that she noticed the small black velvet pouch. The pouch was tucked, very neatly, between the gear stick and the passenger seat, in the small narrow channel where, in any other husband's car, one might find a packet of chewing gum, a folded receipt, a charging cable. It was not a pouch she had ever seen before. It was not a pouch the chambers in Lincoln's Inn used. It was not a pouch the bank used. It was not a pouch anyone Claire knew used. It was small, soft, drawstring at the top, tied in a small careful bow with a length of black silk cord. Claire reached over, with the calm precise gesture of a research librarian opening a catalogue card she has been quietly looking for, and she lifted the pouch out of the channel. She did not, immediately, untie the drawstring. She held it in her palm, weighing it. It weighed approximately 12 grams. It was the weight, although Claire would not put this thought into words for another 48 hours, of a thin gold wedding band. She placed the pouch on the center console. She unfastened the small black silk bow. She tipped the pouch into her open palm. The thin gold wedding band of James Bennett, the band she had placed on his finger in a register office in Islington in the spring of 2013, the band she had photographed in the cream porcelain dish on the console table 17 times in 11 days, slid out of the pouch and lay quietly in the center of her hand. It was warm. It had, very recently, been on a finger. She did not, in that moment, feel any of the things she would have expected to feel. She did not gasp. She did not, even particularly, tighten her fingers around the band. She felt, instead, the small careful curiosity of a woman who had opened the wrong drawer in her own kitchen and found, inside it, the right ring. She did not put the ring back into the pouch. She did not put the pouch back into the channel. What she did was take her phone out of the pocket of her oatmeal jumper, the jumper she had pulled on over her Saturday morning leggings without thinking about it, and she opened the camera app, and she photographed the ring lying in the center of her open palm. She photographed the small black velvet pouch beside it. She photographed the channel between the gear stick and the passenger seat where the pouch had been. She photographed, finally, the dashboard of the Audi, with its date and time visible, Saturday the 9th of August, 2025. 11:47. She returned the ring to the pouch. She returned the pouch to the channel between the gear stick and the passenger seat. She tied the small black silk bow in the same careful loop in which she had found it. She closed the glove compartment, although the pouch had not been inside it. She got out of the car. She walked back into the house. She washed her hands in the kitchen sink for a long time, although there had been nothing on them. Then she went to the laptop in the kitchen, opened a folder she did not yet have a name for, and copied the 4 photographs into it. She named the folder, after a moment of thought, August Inventory. She did not, that day, mention the pouch to her husband. She would not mention it, in fact, for 31 days. What she would do, in the 31 days that followed, was photograph the cream porcelain dish in the hallway every morning at 8:45 and every evening at 6:25, and, on the 4 occasions over those 31 days when she found a small administrative reason to be alone in the navy Audi, she would photograph the small black velvet pouch in the channel beside the passenger seat. She kept count. By the 3rd of September, the folder August Inventory contained 83 photographs. It was, by then, the longest single photographic record Claire Bennett had ever kept of any object in her own house. It was on the 18th of August, a Monday, drizzling, the small sky over Highbury low and Tuesday coloured, that Claire bought the jeweller's loupe. She bought it from a small antique shop on Upper Street that she had walked past, without entering, perhaps 200 times in her 12 years of marriage. It was the kind of shop that smelled, faintly, of beeswax and pipe tobacco and a particular dry warmth that came from old velvet trays. The man at the counter was in his 60s. He had wire-framed glasses pushed up onto his forehead. He did not, when Claire asked for a 10x loop, ask her any questions. He simply said, "Loops are downstairs, madam." She bought a small brass loop with a folding case. It cost £48. She paid in cash, the way her grandmother had paid for things, the way her mother, when she had still been alive, had paid for things she did not particularly want anyone to remember. She put the loop in the inside pocket of her camel wool coat. She walked back to Highbury through the small light rain. She did not, that day, use the loop. She used it, instead, on the Tuesday morning that followed, at 9:15, after James had taken the 9:08 train into Holborn, after the kettle had whistled and been switched off and not used, after Claire had walked from the kitchen into the hallway and stood in front of the cream porcelain dish on the console table. The dish, that Tuesday morning, contained the thin gold wedding band. Claire picked it up. It was the first time, in the 12 years since her own hand had placed that band on her own husband's fourth finger, that she had picked it up to examine it. She walked with it into the kitchen. She sat at the kitchen table by the window, the table at which she had drafted, 2 weeks earlier, 3 reading lists for an undergraduate lecture on Victorian library cataloguing, and she set the band, very carefully, on a small white linen napkin. She took the loop out of her coat pocket. She unfolded it. She held it, in the way the man at the antique shop had shown her, 3 centimeters from the surface of the gold band. She tilted the band, very slowly, in the strong cold morning light from the window. She had expected, in a vague unfocused way, to see 1 or 2 small scratches. The kind of scratches a wedding ring acquired naturally over 12 years of being worn on the hand of a man who occasionally washed cars, occasionally pruned hedges, occasionally lifted heavy law books. She did not see 1 or 2 scratches. She saw, on the inside of the band, a series of fine parallel rub marks, 6 or 7 of them, quite uniform, in a small concentrated arc on what would have been the underside of the band when it was being worn. The rub marks were not the marks of a ring being worn. They were the marks of a ring being slid, repeatedly, into and out of a soft narrow space. A space, for instance, the size of a small black velvet pouch. She tilted the band the other way. On the outer surface, in a very small area near the edge of the band, she saw a faint shadow. It was not a scratch. It was not a dent. It was a darkening, a barely perceptible discoloration of the gold, in the precise small oval shape of the inner side of a fingertip held against the band, repeatedly, with light pressure. The kind of small mark a woman's thumb might make, over the course of a summer, if she had been quietly turning a man's wedding band on his finger before he slid it off into the pouch. Claire put the loop down. She sat at the kitchen table, in the cold morning light, and she looked at the thin gold wedding band on the small white linen napkin. She did not, for a long time, do anything. Then she picked up her phone. She did not, this time, photograph the ring. What she photographed was the small white linen napkin with the band placed at its center, and the brass loop beside it, and the morning light from the window falling across all 3 of them, and the timestamp on her phone screen, Tuesday the 19th of August, 2025. 9:23. She tagged the photograph hallway light, band, inner surface. She added it to the folder August inventory. She returned the band, very carefully, to the cream porcelain dish in the hallway. She turned the band, before she set it down, so that the rub-marked underside faced up. It was a very small gesture. She wanted, she understood now, to know whether James, at 6:25 that evening, when he came home and lifted the band from the dish and slid it back onto his finger, would notice that someone had been turning it. He did not notice. He picked up the band the way he had picked it up every evening for 12 years. He slid it onto his 4th finger. He kissed Claire on the temple. He asked what was for supper. Claire said, lamb shanks. She did not, that night, mention the loop. She did not, that night, mention the rub marks. She did not, that night, mention the small black velvet pouch in the navy Audi. What she did was lie awake in the dark beside her husband, with her hands folded across her stomach, and think, very calmly, about the architecture of a small gesture. She thought about which finger of the woman's right hand would, most naturally, slide a ring off the man's left hand into a small drawstring pouch. She thought about whether the woman did this in the car, before he got out, or whether James himself did it in some moment of small private ceremony before he walked her into the building. She thought, for a long time, about whether the small black silk cord on the pouch had been chosen by him, or by her. It was almost 3 o'clock when she fell asleep. In the morning, she did one small administrative thing. She added a new subfolder to August inventory. She named it in a surface, band. She placed inside it the photographs from the Tuesday morning, and she set the file permissions of the parent folder to owner-only, library personal catalogues. If James Bennett were ever, in the months ahead, to open her laptop, he would find, when he tried to open the folder, only a small grey notification. You do not have permission to view the contents of this folder. He would not, at the time, find that strange. Claire was a librarian. She kept a great many small folders he did not understand. By the end of the 3rd week of August, Claire understood the pattern. The ring was absent from James's hand on Tuesdays and on Fridays, between approximately 23 minutes past 8 in the morning and approximately 20 minutes past 6 in the evening. On those days, the ring sat in the small black velvet pouch, in the channel beside the passenger seat of the navy Audi. On Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and weekends, the ring stayed on his hand all day. It sat in the cream porcelain dish only on the rare evenings when James washed dishes by hand, or kneaded bread, or took a long warm bath. It was a precise rhythm. It was the rhythm of a man who had 2 specific weekday lunches. Claire, who was a research librarian and who had spent 12 years quietly knowing approximately what James's diary looked like, knew that he had, on most Tuesdays during term time, a working lunch with a junior counsel from Garden Court Chambers in a small Italian restaurant on Chancery Lane. She knew that he had, on most Fridays, a long lunch with the senior partner from his own chambers in a French bistro on Exmouth Market. Neither of those lunches had, in 12 years, ever required the removal of his wedding ring. Whatever was happening on Tuesdays and Fridays, it was not happening at Chancery Lane and it was not happening at Exmouth Market. It was happening somewhere the wedding ring could not be seen. Claire did not, that 4th week, follow him. She did not, that 4th week, hire anyone to follow him. What she did, instead, was something quieter. On the Tuesday morning of the 26th of August, she walked into the hallway at 20 past 8, 10 minutes before James left for the train, and she took the cream porcelain dish off the console table. She did not move it far. She moved it, by approximately 7 centimeters, towards the front of the table. It was a very small distance. It was the kind of distance only a woman who had stood in front of that console table for 12 years would have noticed. She watched, from the kitchen doorway, as James came down the stairs at 23 minutes past 8, fastening his charcoal silk tie. She watched him cross the 3rd Edwardian board with its small soft creak. She watched him pause, for 1/4 of a second, in front of the console table. She watched his eyes flicker, very briefly, to the slightly moved cream porcelain dish. She watched the small, almost imperceptible adjustment of his right hand as it reached, instinctively, for where the dish had been, and then, with 1 millimeter of correction, where it now was. She watched him slide the thin gold wedding band off his 4th finger. She watched him place it in the dish. She watched him take, from the inside breast pocket of his charcoal jacket, the small black velvet pouch. She watched him untie the small black silk bow. She watched him place the band, very carefully, into the pouch. She watched him pull the drawstring tight, retie the bow, and slip the pouch back into his inside breast pocket. She watched him pick up his briefcase. She watched him open the front door. She watched him close the front door behind him, very softly, as he had closed it every morning for 12 years. The hallway was quiet. The cream porcelain dish, on the slightly moved position on the console table, contained nothing. The thin gold wedding band of James Bennett was, at that moment, in his inside breast pocket, on its way to a Tuesday lunch. Claire walked into the hallway. She picked up the cream porcelain dish. She moved it back to its precise original position on the console table, the position it had occupied, at exactly that millimeter, for 12 years of marriage. She took her phone out of the pocket of her cream cashmere knit. She photographed the empty dish. She tagged the photograph hallway light, Tuesday 26 August, 8:24, dish moved 7 centimeters, band transferred from dish to inside breast pocket via velvet pouch. She returned to the kitchen. She made her Earl Grey. She did not, that day, do anything else. It was on the 1st of September that Claire bought the second wedding band. She bought it from a jeweler on Hatton Garden, a small old-fashioned shop that she had walked past, without entering, perhaps 30 times during the years she had worked at the British Library on Euston Road. It was the kind of shop in which the man behind the counter did not look up immediately when one entered, and in which the small velvet trays of bands were laid out in narrow drawers under the counter, in order of width. She asked for a thin yellow gold band, 9-carat, plain. Width, 2 millimeters. Internal diameter, 19.4 millimeters. The man behind the counter, who was in his early 70s, did not, when she gave him the dimensions, ask her any questions. He simply opened the third drawer down. The band she selected was, to a casual eye, identical to the band she had placed on James Bennett's fourth finger in the register office in Islington in the spring of 2013. It was not, of course, identical. The original band had been engraved, on the inside, with the date of their marriage, the 21st of April, 2013, in a small italic script chosen by Claire from a catalogue at the time. The replacement band was unengraved. The man behind the counter offered, very politely, to engrave it. Claire said, "No, thank you. I'll keep it plain." He nodded. He folded the band into a small square of cotton, placed the cotton in a small jeweller's box, placed the box in a small paper bag with the shop's name printed on the side in faded green, and gave it to Claire with the receipt. The receipt cost £340. She paid in cash. She walked out of the shop into the bright September light on Hatton Garden, and she put the small paper bag into the inside pocket of her camel wool coat, and she walked, the long way, back to Holborn Station. She did not, on the train back to Highbury, take the band out of its box. She did not, that evening at home, take it out either. She put the small paper bag, still folded, into the back of the linen drawer in the spare bedroom, under the third pile of folded sheets, beside the box of small things her late mother had given her. It sat there, untouched, for 2 days. On the third morning, Wednesday, the 3rd of September, at 9:20, after James had taken the 908 into Holborn, Claire took the small paper bag out of the linen drawer. She walked downstairs. She walked into the hallway. She did one very small thing. She took, from the cream porcelain dish on the console table, the thin gold wedding band that James had placed there at 6:25 the previous evening, the original band, the engraved band, the one that had sat, on 12 Tuesdays and 12 Fridays over the summer, in the small black velvet pouch. She placed it in the small jeweller's box. She placed the small jeweller's box in her own inside coat pocket. She placed the second band, the new one, the unengraved one, the identical one, the one James had never seen, into the cream porcelain dish. She did not, in that small action, hesitate at all. She walked back into the kitchen. She made her Earl Grey. She drafted for reading lists for an undergraduate lecture on Victorian library cataloguing. At 6:25 in the evening, James came home. He stood in the hallway, taking off his charcoal wool overcoat. He turned, casually, to the console table. He picked up the thin gold wedding band, the new one, the unengraved one, the one she had placed there 9 hours earlier, with 2 fingers. He slid it onto the fourth finger of his left hand. He did not, in that small action, hesitate at all. He did not glance at the inside of the band. He did not feel, against his fingertip, the absence of the engraving. He walked into the kitchen, kissed Claire on the temple, and asked what was for supper. Claire said, "Salmon." She did not, that night, mention the band. She did not, in fact, mention it for another 7 months. What she did, instead, was take the original engraved band, the one she had quietly removed from the dish that morning, and place it in a small white envelope. She wrote, on the front of the envelope, in her smallest neat hand, "The 21st of April, 2013, original. Removed the 3rd of September, 2025. Date of removal, see August inventory." She placed the envelope, with the original band still inside it, in a small fireproof document tin she kept on the top shelf of the spare bedroom wardrobe, the tin that contained, among other things, the deeds to the house in Highbury, her mother's death certificate, and a copy of her own will. She closed the tin. She closed the wardrobe door. She walked downstairs. She made supper. She did not, that evening, look at the new band on her husband's fourth finger. She knew, now, where the original was. She knew, now, where the original had been on 12 Tuesdays and 12 Fridays. She knew, now, that the man at the kitchen table was wearing a band he had never been given by anyone at all, and that he had not, in fact, noticed. That was the smallest fact in the entire summer. It was also, in the end, the loudest. There is one further detail of the summer of 2025 that Claire would not, until much later, fully understand. On the evening of the 3rd of September, the evening James came home and slid the unengraved replacement band onto his finger without noticing, Claire sat at the kitchen table after he had gone up to bed, and she opened the laptop, and she scrolled, very calmly, to the bottom of the folder August inventory. She did not, that night, intend to add a photograph. What she intended to do was something quieter. She opened a new document. She titled it Letter to James, Draft, Do Not Send. She typed, at the top of the document, the date. She wrote, in the small careful prose she used in her professional life when she had to summarize a complex bibliographic record. James, there are 87 photographs in a folder on this laptop showing the wedding ring you have, on 12 Tuesdays and 12 Fridays this summer, removed from your hand and placed in a small black velvet pouch in the channel beside the passenger seat of the Audi. The band you are now wearing, that you slid onto your hand this evening at 6:25, is not the band I gave you in the register office in Islington in the spring of 2013. The original is in the fireproof tin in the spare bedroom. I will not, this evening or this week or this month, ask you who the pouch was for. I will, instead, wait for you to notice that the band on your hand has no engraving. If you have not noticed by Christmas, I will draw my own conclusions. She read the letter twice. She did not save it. She did not send it. She did not, in fact, do anything with it. She closed the laptop. She turned off the kitchen light. She climbed the stairs of the house in Highbury, the stairs she had carried the thin gold wedding band up, in a fireproof tin, 11 hours earlier, and she got into bed beside her husband, and she listened to him breathe. He did not, in the morning, notice. He did not notice in October, the October in which he would, on a Wednesday evening, rename the Wi-Fi network in the kitchen and add the suffix new. He did not notice in November. He did not notice at Christmas. He did not notice on Valentine's Day, when Claire would, in a small rare gesture of dark humor she did not entirely understand in herself, wear, on a length of ribbon under her dress, the original engraved band, and James, at the table at the bistro on Exmouth Market, would compliment her on her quiet glow. He would not notice, in fact, until the second week of March 2026, 3 days after Helen Whitcomb had placed a thick A for Levu arch folder on the polished walnut table in Chambers in Lincoln's Inn, and Claire had taken the original engraved band out of the fireproof tin, and placed it on the kitchen island beside a printed receipt from a perfumery in Marylebone, and asked her husband to leave by the end of the month. He would, in the moment of his eyes finding that ring on the kitchen island, finally look down at the band on his own fourth finger. He would see, for the first time, that there was no engraving. He would say, very quietly, "When did you replace it?" Claire, in the morning light from the kitchen window, would look at the small space between the cream porcelain dish in the hallway and the navy Audi on the driveway, and she would say, "The 3rd of September. You had been wearing the wrong one for 6 months." He would not, in the moments that followed, find anything to say. There was, by then, very little left to say. She had been wearing the right one all along. In late March, in the chambers in Lincoln's Inn, for days after the conversation in the kitchen, Helen Whitcomb placed a small white envelope on the polished walnut table beside the thick A4 levu arch folder of router logs. She said, very calmly, to the slightly younger solicitor across the table, in addition to the Wi-Fi log, the perfumery receipt, and the deletion thread of the 4th of March, my client also retained the original engraved wedding band. The band currently being worn by your client is a 9-carat replacement purchased on the 1st of September of last year. The replacement is unengraved. The original bears the inscription 21/0 for 2013. She tapped the envelope, once, very lightly. She said, I am not certain you will want this raised in court. The slightly younger solicitor cleared his throat. He did not, in fact, want it raised. The financial settlement, that morning, was adjusted, again, in a direction Helen Whitcomb described in the email she sent to Claire later that evening as significantly more favorable to your position. In the email, Helen included one further line. She wrote, the band detail was, frankly, the moment opposing counsel went silent. May I ask, when did you buy the replacement? Claire wrote back, from the kitchen of the house in Highbury, with a single white mug of Earl Grey tea cooling beside her at the table where she